go!
We are back, and this is the final session. It would be wrong to say that we saved the best for last because we had so many great people talking over the past 2 days. It was amazing what we had going on here, and wow, we're down to the end of this, and no technical problems or anything. Everyone's enjoying this. This woman has been on my podcast probably more times on a Friday show than any other guest. As a matter of fact, we even thought about changing it to the Vinny and Nina show, making her like the other Anna Vocino and Gina Graf. She always brings great information. You want to go check her out. She's got something called the Nutrition Coalition, where they're really working on trying to change what we do and what we know as a government, you know, from the ground up, if you will. She also wrote one of my favorite books on the subject, The Big Fat Surprise. I can't say enough about this woman. She was in the movie, Fat, a documentary. That's all I'm going to say, folks. I'm going to turn it over to her. Nina, thank you for coming on, and take it away.
Thank you, Vinny. Thanks for having this whole summit, and I'm really excited to be talking to everyone. I wish I could see you. It's been too long that we've all been able to be together, but it's great to come out of quarantine for this. And so I prepared a little talk, which of course I prepared only at the last minute. And I want to, it is about the dietary guidelines. But I'm passionate to talk to you about this because, let me see if I can just do this, play the slideshow. Let's see if that works. Okay. I'm passionate to talk to you about this because, you know, I've been obsessed with this subject for the past really 5 years. And it really is a continuation of a theme that many of us really care about, which is why is it that we've gotten such bad advice? Where does that advice come from? Why can't it change? Why can it not respond to the science? What is behind all of that resistance to change? And it just so happens dietary guidelines are issued every 5 years. And in this year, we're going to get a new set of guidelines. And I want to tell you kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly about what we are going to get with these new dietary guidelines. So here are my disclosures, which are pretty modest. What I plan to talk about today to you, why you might or might not care about the U.S. dietary guidelines. Did you know we're about to get a new dietary guidelines, and will they be any different? Is there any hope? And then I have 8 astonishing things, truly astonishing things to tell you about the guidelines that even devotees may not know. And then what you can do about it if you would choose to or would like to make a difference. So let's just start with, what are the guidelines? Of course, these are the guidelines. Everybody knows them. They grew up with a pyramid or MyPlate. And so, you know, they basically have told us to eat that big bottom slab of all carbohydrates, grains, pasta, 6 to 11 servings a day. Now I think it's a little bit less, but still a lot of grains and very little animal foods. They came out of the U.S. Dietary Goals, as many of you know, which was from the U.S. Senate Select Committee. And they started, and this all happened in the late 1970s, and the guidelines were launched in 1980. That's George McGovern, who was the head of that committee at the time. And if you want to know more about this whole process of how they started these guidelines that are so influential, I suggest you read my book or Gary Taubes' book, and we both kind of cover a lot of the territory. And there's actually an amazing article by Gary Taubes that I couldn't pull up for today, but I think it's in Science Magazine, where he goes through kind of blow by blow exactly what happened in that Senate Select Committee, and is worth digging up if this subject interests you. Okay, so do they make a difference? Who cares? Nobody knows about the guidelines. Nobody I've ever talked to goes to a .gov website to learn about what to eat. So here's some ways in which you might not know how the guidelines affect you. If you have kids in schools or nieces or nephews, or just like any child at all, this is the kind of food they're getting served in schools, and that is 100% determined by the guidelines. Notice that it's 1%, or only 1% or non-fat milk is allowed, or you can have juice. And this is another one of those pictures of school lunches, and for school breakfast, which if you are below a certain level of income, you can also get your breakfast at school. You can have a super donut, because that is actually condoned and covered by the guidelines. That is, the guidelines recommend that you get a certain amount of sugar and a certain amount of refined grain. And one of the things that astonished me when I started to look into all this was that the big food companies are actually, they are so in with the school, these huge school contracts. So this is PepsiCo. These are some of the things that they have on their K through 12 Passion to Please lunch program. You can get nachos, munchies. This is also part of their Passion to Please. I mean, it is worth spending a little time on this website to see what can be served under the guidelines, according, under government rules to your children. Here's another one. You can get Mountain Dew or Kickstart Dew with, as you can see, 15 grams of sugar, part of the program. Okay, well, what about, there's also programs that maybe not too many people are familiar with, but they're for poor women, women and infant children programs, and they're women who are poor and with pregnant or have very young infants. And if one of the things that when I went in to look at what they serve people, you'll notice that the protein options really do not include, as far as I can tell, meat. So every state has its own what's called WIC basket, where you can get soy beverages, tofu, cheese, you can get eggs, but there's no meat. And the same with this one here. You can see you can get Kix, Dora Explorer cereals, Chex, Life. You can get any kind of fruit juice, it seems, that you can imagine, full of sugar. But can you get any protein? That is, you can't get any meat. You can get peanut butter, beans, lentils, peas. The best you can do really is milk, cheese, and eggs. So that is striking. I don't know how meat was eliminated from these programs, but okay, here's a picture to show why else you might care about the guidelines. Even if you don't have kids in school and you don't care about the WIC basket, many of us who have ignored the guidelines are really tired of arguing with our doctors about why we are not following the guidelines. And it may be your primary care doctor, or it may be a specialty doctor when you're trying to get something done. And they just, there is just a widespread culture of believing that doing anything but the guidelines is really not the gold standard. And it is exhausting to constantly be battling your doctors. So, and it's exhausting as a doctor to really battle the system in hospitals and in dealing with specialty experts. So going back to those USDA feeding assistance programs, which are school lunches and WIC, they also include the SNAP, which is food stamps, feeding programs to the elderly, food programs for Native American populations, and altogether feed 1 in 4 Americans regularly every month, I believe. Why is this so important? Well, and this is something that has, I think, changed even within the last few months. Minorities, as we know, are far more likely to rely on these feeding assistance programs that are driven by USDA, that are based on the guidelines. Minorities are also about 2 times more likely to have a diet-related disease, obesity, diabetes, hypertension. And we know that those diseases are also increase the risk of poor outcomes from the coronavirus, including poor hospitalization outcomes and death. So in some ways, the guidelines mean that, with the coronavirus, we are really all in this together. We are all dependent on each other to be healthy and to be less vulnerable to the coronavirus. And that means, I think, really thinking about what we are feeding our poor people. And really making sure that they can be as healthy and strong and as least vulnerable as possible until the vaccine, which we all know is right around the corner. So here, is many people have seen this chart, is the legacy of the guidelines. They certainly have, we can't say from this chart they have caused obesity and diabetes and overweight and other diseases, but we can certainly say they haven't prevented them. And the obesity rate today stands at 42.4% of America, of adult Americans. And here's another chart, thanks to Amy Igus, who just put this together for us, which shows us the dietary guideline report. The dietary guidelines come out every 5 years. Each one of these bars reflects the length of that report, and it just keeps getting longer and longer, and yet obesity continues to rise. So no matter how much science they study and how much they write about it, it doesn't seem to make a dent in the obesity rate. This last one in 2020, the number there says about 500, but actually if you add in all the supplement materials, it's actually up to about 835 pages. So that's this report. It just came out about 2 weeks ago. And I want to tell you now 8 shocking things about that report and the dietary guidelines generally. Okay, so one is that, and this is, I'm bringing this up first because we've obviously just been talking about minorities and their greater propensity for diet-related diseases, and they're having to rely more and more on this government food. So the scientific reviews in the 2020 expert report almost entirely ignore race, ethnicity, or low socioeconomic status. So I actually went through every single one of the scientific review questions, which I wish upon nobody, and came up with that 91 to 95% of them either do not take into account race or ethnicity, do not represent low socioeconomic populations, or included almost entirely high socioeconomic subjects who are mostly white. So this report will soon be published by this organization listed there. But really, how can you be making recommendations? How can you be feeding food to populations about which you have no information? I mean, there's a certain amount of our biology that we all have in common. I think we understand that, but there are differences. There are differences in vitamin D absorption. There are differences in lactose intolerance. There are differences. There are all kinds of differences that really are worth studying. So number 2 surprising things, the guidelines do not meet basic nutrient goals for growth or health, meaning that if you follow them perfectly, or if you're somebody who has to rely on them for breakfast and for lunch, if you're a school child, they are not meeting your goals for potassium, vitamin D, vitamin E, and choline. Many people know choline is very important for brain health. I mean, all nutrients, if they're essential, they're essential. And we know that the underconsumption of essential nutrients are major public health concerns in America. Yet, the dietary guidelines don't solve this problem. And this is the latest report where they took a look at, can our recommendations meet all the nutrient needs of the US population? And here was their answer: no, they do not meet the recommendation for iron, the result of which is anemia, as a result of iron deficiency, which can be quite dangerous and is quite prevalent among women, especially in America. Vitamin D is another one they fall short of, vitamin E, and again, choline. And they said to solve that, they suggest supplementation or consumption of fortified foods, which means they recommend that you consume artificial supplementation rather than getting those nutrients from real foods. Because I think, as many people know, that these nutrients are most abundant in animal foods, and those foods are still limited by the caps that remain on saturated fats. Number 3, surprising, amazing thing. The USDA, the dietary guidelines, even though they tell you eat whole grains, Michelle Obama was very high in whole grains, they actually, when you look at what they serve, when they go out to serve lunches or programs for the elderly, they are serving just about the same amount of refined grains as whole grains. Why? It's not particularly clear, but it's possible that it's because only refined grains, but not whole grains, are fortified and enriched in those nutrients that the dietary patterns, USDA diets just can't fill. And maybe you already know this, but the dietary guidelines, and in general, when we're talking about grains and carbs, all of the dietary guidelines patterns, you can see there are 3 of them: US style, Mediterranean, I think they actually call it Mediterranean style because it's not really a Mediterranean diet, and the vegetarian diet, all are over 50% carbohydrates. Number 4, and this is not a small point, but the expert report, the 2020 expert report, ignored a great deal of science. It's a little shocking how much science it ignored. So the first thing it did is it ignored or excluded all the trials on low carbohydrate diets. This is really, truly astonishing. And this is using a fairly conservative definition of low carb by this group, Low Carb Action, which is working on this issue. They counted up at least 66 studies where there had been tested using 25% of calories or less, which I think is coming to be the accepted definition of a low carb diet, but is still perhaps considered a conservative estimate. But still, the Dietary Guideline Committee could not find any of these trials, or a better way to say that is that they developed exclusion criteria to exclude them all. And so there is when they came to their analysis of low carb diets, they said, well, there's just not enough evidence to say anything. And I should link you all. I did write an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago talking about what happened in 2015, 5 years ago, where they actually did review the low carb diets in a more comprehensive way, but then they sort of buried that information and stuffed it in the methodology section of the report, where it really doesn't belong. It belongs in the diet section of the report. And that one of the committee members objected and said, you really shouldn't be burying was his word. This is a Harvard professor. You should not be burying the information there. It's really a large body of research. But that did not seem to, he could not change the course of that. So that was 5 years ago. Now there's so much more evidence and they're still ignoring all of it. Okay, they also excluded all trials on weight loss. Doesn't that seem strange when 2/3 of the nation is overweight or obese or more? I think it's up to, a little over 2/3 now. Why did they do that? They did that, and this is something that I think is truly hard to understand, that the dietary guidelines are only for disease prevention. So they are not looking at the literature on how to reverse disease. So they're not looking at, say, the Verta study that showed how to reverse diabetes. They're not looking at any of the studies that show how you might sustainably lose weight or you might reverse fatty liver disease. They're ignoring that. And the policy is only for healthy Americans. I would say sort of in their defense that when the guidelines started in 1980, it made sense that they should be for healthy Americans, or as Congress said, the general public. But now the general public, 60% of Americans have been diagnosed with one or more diet-related disease. The general public is not well. The general public is sick, but the guidelines are stuck in this increasingly, on this increasingly shrinking population, and they refuse to expand their scope to include the majority of America. Okay, so number 5, the Dietary Guideline Committee excluded the last decade of science on saturated fats. Many of you will know this is a particular passion of mine and the central focus of my book. And I have been following this science very closely. And so I know that there are now nearly 20 review papers over the past decade that have gone back and looked at all of the sort of long lost clinical trials on saturated fat, and they've all concluded that these fats have no effect on cardiovascular or total mortality. So this comes from clinical trials, cause and effect data, the most rigorous kind of data there is. And this really is, these are different teams of scientists all over the world independently evaluating the data. Most recently, there was this highly significant paper that came out in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, a very prestigious journal. And it said, it basically says, there's no more reason to maintain caps on saturated fats. It explains the why LDL cholesterol is not quite the issue that people thought when it comes to diet. And it goes into a number of other explanations. I think what is especially notable about this paper, aside from being published in the American College of Cardiology, because perhaps, as you know, cardiologists are among the most conservative on this subject, but 3 of the authors here are former members of the Dietary Guideline Committee. So one of them was on the Saturated Fat Committee in 2015, that's Tom Brenna, and another one was the chair of the 2005 Dietary Guideline Committee, that's Janet King. And here they are saying, listen, we published those recommendations, but we believe the science has evolved, or the understanding of the science has evolved, and that these and that the recommendations should change and the caps should be dropped. But that was all ignored by the 2020 Dietary Guideline Committee, and they said the relationship between saturated fats and heart disease remains strong, not only for adults, but for the first time ever for children now, going back to data that comes from a small group of children with familial hypercholesterolemia that were studied in the 1970s. Anyway, this is a very disappointing conclusion, and it is clearly not reflective of the science. I'm just pointing this out. This is our website, which is nutritioncoalition.us. If you want to go and look and see all the links to all those nearly 20 review papers, including the one by the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, we keep a list of them all there, and you're welcome to go look at them for yourself. Number 6 astonishing thing is this report used no recognizable verified methodology. Okay, that sounds like a lot of big words, and what does that mean? Well, science, if you're going to review science, if you're going to review like a stack of reports, you have to have a method for doing that. You have to say, okay, these papers on mice are less important, and the papers on clinical trials on humans are more important. But this committee did not provide any. They did not explain any of their methods for how they graded the science. So there was no way to know. And a friend of mine came up with this analogy. She said, it's like your teacher doesn't tell you how they're going to grade a test. Is it 5 points for this and 4 points for that? Are you going to, or is it just whatever she thinks and she might change her mind the next time? That is really a problem, especially in science. And it's especially a problem because the conclusions are therefore not reproducible. Science needs to be reproducible. If you don't explain how you've come to your conclusion, if you don't provide the roadmap that people can check, there is no way to reproduce this science. There are statements in this report where they literally just say, we looked at those studies, we looked at these studies, and we came up with this grade. We think the data is strong. That's it. And this is, of course, also contrary to strong recommendations that were made by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in 2017. They said it's really important. One of their major recommendations was you must upgrade your methodology and use a state-of-the-art system so that the guidelines are systematic, reliable, and trustworthy. By implication, without a methodology, they are none of those. Number 7 surprising thing. The Dietary Guideline, now this is probably not surprising to many of you, but the Dietary Guideline Expert Committee has many conflicts of interest. This is a report by a group called Corporate Accountability. They found that more than half of the committee had ties to the Institute of Life Sciences Institute, which is a nonprofit, but There's a group called Right to Know that has uncovered, and others, also the New York Times has done a great deal of work on this, showing that they're really just a front for the multinational food and pharmaceutical and supplement, and I think some chemical industries as well. So, and when we say more than half of the committee has ties to ILSI, some of the ties are not serious, but in some cases, some of the members of the committee are actually lobbyists, or they actually lobby the government on behalf of ILSI, which I would consider a pretty serious conflict of interest. This is the committee, and it's usually 13 to 15 people, and this year it's many, many more because they took on this birth through 24. They decided for the first time to provide recommendations for the birth through 24 cohort. And I think I cannot resist making the statement that it's only because they're only doing this because they've done such a good job with the rest of the American population. Now they want to move on to the youngest and most vulnerable among us. One of the things I discovered in the course of my research is that this birth through 24 reviews were actually almost entirely conducted and finished before this committee even convened. So the USDA staff did it all themselves. And this is sort of a separate topic, but it seems like USDA is, the committee to some extent provides what one might argue is kind of window dressing for a system that is really being driven, the reviews being done and conducted by USDA staff. Oh, sorry, I wanted to just go back to this committee just for a second to point out, I was talking about the conflicts of interest. We have at our website an analysis, just a little brief analysis of some of the conflicts of interest on this committee, and they include the former science officer at Merck, a huge pharmaceutical company, Jamie Ard, who's in the upper left-hand corner. He is the medical director for Optifast for Nestle, which if you are assigned to a committee to look for food-based solutions, it might be a conflict that you have invested your entire career in using formula-based approaches versus food-based approaches. There's another gentleman here, Juan Sabate, who is a very senior level member of at Loma Linda University, which is a Seventh-day Adventist organization, which believes that the vegetarian diet or the vegan diet really is the path to the second coming, and it's important for everybody to restore themselves to this original intended diet. And he has written about with great pride about the spread of this the power of the Seventh-day Adventist group to spread this diet all over the world. So there are many other significant conflicts of interest. I think almost everybody has a long list of corporations, food and pharma that they work with. But we are going to publish something on that a little later. So number 8, and we're nearing the end here, there is a truly minuscule amount of rigorous data supporting the USDA dietary patterns. It is shocking to see that they are based on only a handful of clinical trials. I do a whole other talk where I talk about what other clinical trials that they're based on, but they're mainly supported. I mean, I can mention a couple of them to you. You know, the PREDIMED trial, which was done in Spain on a so-called Mediterranean diet, which was actually almost 40% fat. It was not the lower fat diet that USDA recommends. And then there's one other Mediterranean diet study that was done for 2 years, after which they showed, I think it was 2 or 3 pounds of weight loss. And but otherwise, the dietary patterns are supported mainly by weak observational data that can show association but not demonstrate causation. This type of data is normally not used as the basis for strong recommendations, but has been in the dietary patterns. And then, of course, all the evidence to the contrary has been excluded or ignored. So I think the biggest study that has been most is most well known and is ignored is that the Women's Health Initiative on 49,000 women, where they were on the they were given the USDA diet for an average of 8 years, and at the end of which, it was actually a study that was powered for cancer. At the end of following that diet and seeing significant changes in what they ate, they saw no benefit for any kind of cancer, no benefit for heart disease, no benefit for preventing diabetes, and no benefit for preventing weight gain. So that study is not mentioned in the dietary patterns in the USDA evidence base. And I could tell you that I did another unpleasant thing, which was actually to go through all of the clinical trials that were mentioned in the 2015 Dietary Guidelines. And that is how I know that there are so few clinical trials that actually support these recommendations. It's all published in that paper, and you can go look it up all for yourself. So it's an astonishing fact that the current 2020 report simply says we're going to defer to the 2015 report's conclusions. We did it at what they called an evidence scan, something I had never heard of. And when I searched it in PubMed, there only one paper comes up. So they invented, I guess, something called an evidence scan, and they said, well, the evidence generally looks just about the same as it did in 2015, so we're just going to go with those 2015 conclusions. In other words, we're not going to really update the science. The 2000 report only goes up through 2013, so when the 2020 dietary guidelines come out, they're going to be as fresh and current as 2013, already 7 years out of date. And you should know that actually the law that allows for the dietary guidelines said that the dietary guidelines should be based on the most current evidence that is available at the time. So I don't know if they consider 7 years out of date to be current evidence, but I'm not sure I would. So this is where we get to the part where what can you do about it? If you want to do something about it, you can go to our website, and if you push that button there, you can, that will connect you to Congress. And it is important that Congress hear our voices. And what I mean is, if you believe the dietary guidelines have not served you and that they need to better serve all Americans, then now's the time to tell your congressman, because the expert report has come out, but the final so-called policy document, the document that is actually going to get implemented as policy, that won't come out until the end of the year. So there is this moment now when we can potentially still make a difference. And I will tell you that I think that the only branch of government, I mean, USDA and HHS clearly, who run the guidelines, clearly don't seem to be interested in updating the science. And so I urge you to write or email or tweet your congressman and let them know how important this is to you, and that they really cannot continue this policy that does at least upon the principle of let us do no harm. Let us at least do no harm. Okay, so that's it. I came out early, I think, but maybe that'll allow for a little more time for questions. And I'm sure people have many since, let's see, there we go. And I think I can. Yeah,
so at the bottom there, Nina, you see ask a question.
Yeah, I'm looking.
Great.
Do I believe it's possible for a vegan or vegetarian to follow a high-fat diet? We are fellow Berkeley residents like you were. Yes, I lived in Berkeley, and I was not a vegan, but I was a non-red meat eater and didn't have any butter and sort of vegetarian for decades. I think it is possible to follow a high-fat, low-carb diet as a vegan or vegetarian. I know that it is harder. You have to be more careful about the foods that you choose, and you have to be, if you're vegan, you have to be very careful to supplement, especially with the vitamins that you're not obtaining from your food. So, that would be at least B12 and also omega-3 fatty acids. But it is possible. And I think that ultimately the aim is good health. And for ethical vegans and vegetarians, they deserve they should be healthy too. So it is possible. And there are resources on the internet to help design those diets. Somebody asks, is saturated fat a problem if you are eating high sugar and carbs too? There is a small amount of data showing that saturated fats can be somewhat inflammatory if combined with a lot of sugar and carbs. But I would say that there's two pieces of data I want to relay. Well, two things I want to relay. One is that in the clinical trials where they replaced saturated fats with polyunsaturated fats, and these were clinical trials on some 75,000 people that were done in the 60s and 70s, at least. A huge number of people were tested. And in general, the arm of the trial that was eating a lot of saturated fat was eating 18% saturated fat, which was what was considered normal at the time. 18% saturated fat is a lot. And they did not notice any adverse effects, any adverse cardiovascular effects, eating 18% saturated fat and on a diet that presumably also had, wasn't a low-carb diet. Those were not low-carb diets. So I think that data would give me quite a bit of confidence to say at least 18% of saturated fats is okay. The other thing I would say is if you do find that there's some kind of personally, you're eating saturated fats and you're eating a lot of sugar and carbs, what is it that you reduce? Clearly, it's the sugar and carbs that are more damaging to and increase your chances for insulin resistance. So I hope that answers your question. Nina, what could each of us do to advocate for change in the guidelines? I would definitely go to that website and hit the Take Action button. We are also starting a video campaign where we're going to ask everybody to make a 1-minute video about how they got better by ignoring the guidelines. And so if you watch our Twitter feed, we will announce it there. Our Twitter feed is for dietary reform. I should have had that up there, but you can find it on our website. I think that really that going to members of Congress, they're in charge of the guidelines. They have authority over the guidelines. I think that is the very best thing we can do right now. I think the answer could be different in 6 months after the guidelines come out. Then there are other possibilities and ways that we could that people could work for change, either in medical schools or in their local schools. But the reason I keep coming back to the guidelines is just that they're considered the gold standard, and so many people and doctors and institutions refer to them as kind of their backstop, their gold standard backstop, and that's why it would be so effective if they could change. Has anybody researched if the panel is getting cash from producers? We are about to come out with a report about the many, many conflicts of interest on the panel. Cash, I don't know, but they get research funds. They're on their scientific panels, which are often paid positions. Actually, interestingly, even more of a conflict may be that a few of them get millions of dollars in contracts from the government. So they're so closely tied to the government, and there's like really almost no chance that they would turn around on their virtual employer who's granting them millions of dollars in a research fund to say, you know what, I think you got your major policy wrong. So that's another conflict of interest. Let's see. Are there any new allies? There is this new group, Food for Health, that has taken on the Food for Health Alliance that has taken on groups that are representing minorities' interests more, like Hispanic doctors, the Black Nurses Association, and others. And I think that this issue of the fact that the guidelines so completely exclude research on or consideration of minorities is a real problem. The exclusion of large portions of our society with this kind of one-size-fits-all diet for everybody, I think, is an issue that maybe may catch on. So that is definitely an interesting development.
Nina, a few people are asking if you can address the questions that are at the top that have the most votes.
Oh, sorry, didn't realize that's how it works.
Yeah, so it scrolls, if you scroll up to the top of the questions window, the ones at the top have the most votes.
Oh, okay, thanks for letting me know.
Sure.
Okay, so when writing to our government officials, what are certain approach or key points to make? If you go to that take action button, we actually have a script there so it makes it really easy. And we leave a place for you to write your own story too, which is important. It's important that not everybody writes some kind of robo form, and it's important that people tell their own stories. And then if you want to use some of the text that is there, then it's there for you. Like the dates, the facts, the everything, the footnotes, everything is there for you. So it makes that easier. Who determines the Dietary Guideline Committee members? That is another black box procedure. It's the truth, you don't know, which is some people at USDA get together, they get a bunch of applications, and they go into a room and decide who gets to serve on the committee. I can tell you that this year we nominated John Ioannidis, who's been a critic of nutrition policy and has a sense of evidence-based evidence-based policy, and they lost his application, we were told. And we nominated a few other people, but if you look at who is successful in getting their people nominated, you can see who has influence in the process. So the American Society for Nutrition, which is basically the Society of Nutrition Academics, they get like 7 of their members on there. The Academy of the Dietitians Group gets many of their nominees on there. The Physicians, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is basically an animal rights organization, they got the Seventh-day Adventist on there. So, the food and beverage groups, it's mainly ideological and commercial interests, and then these professional groups. Is the rest of the world also recommending this way to eat to their residents? The U.S. Dietary Guidelines were the first government guidelines anywhere in the world. And so we invented the idea. And then we exported it to every other country in the world. And pretty much everybody follows our lead. I think a notable example is Brazil, where they've decided to just say, don't eat processed foods, although the definition of processed foods is very difficult to determine. But, they're a little bit more vague about what they recommend. But almost all other countries follow the U.S. Dietary Guidelines, which is, again, why it is so important that we get the science right. It is so important. Because I think there would be sort of a domino effect if we could finally speak about some of the science that has, the last 20 years of science. If I had my wish, what would the guidelines look like? So first of all, I would make clear to the American public that the low-fat diet is over. There is no more low-fat language in the guidelines. It's all gone. If you search the website, you can't find one mention of low-fat, but they never put out a single press release or told anybody or made it part of their educational materials to say, low-fat is over, ding dong, witch is dead. So, and they still have, lean meats and low-fat dairy. So first, get rid of, let everybody know the low-fat diet is over. Number 2, eliminate the caps on saturated fats because they're clearly not supported by the evidence and never were, really. Number 3, offer as one option, just one option, a low-carb dietary pattern, a true low-carb diet for people who are struggling with insulin resistance and all of the related diseases that come with that. I would say also to stop telling people that aerobic exercise is an effective way for maintaining weight or for losing weight, which is sort of a tangential part of the guidelines. And then I guess the other really major point is, I wouldn't tell people to reduce or restrict red or processed meats because the rigorous evidence does not support that recommendation. And then I would revisit the salt recommendation, which currently says, keep your salt as low as possible or something to that effect. When in fact, if you look at the evidence on salt, and this has been widely discussed, there's a J-shaped curve whereby a medium amount of salt seems to be most beneficial for cardiovascular health. And in any case, we only have data on people who are middle-aged hypertensive people with, and so, to recommend that for all people, including school children on whom there's no data. So the salt recommendation should really be revised. And then I think that, if you really wanted to go out there on a limb, I would say that, the recommendation that people eat so much fruits and vegetables is really not, there's really no science to support that either. I mean, certainly vegetables are healthy food for many people, but not all people. But there has to be more of a reconsideration about lumping fruits and vegetables together as if they're one thing, and reconsidering that for some people, fruit really is, translates into your blood as sugar, and so too much fruit is not your friend if you're overweight or a diabetic, to quote maybe Gary Taubes on that one. Let's see, going back up to the top. Do the USDA just not know the science, or are they motivated by money and politics? That's a big question. I think the answer is not simple. I think there are clearly major interests by the food and pharmaceutical interests, and they are long invested in this process. And I also think there is a kind of religious not religious, but an ideological fervor at USDA, at the people who work on these guidelines. They genuinely believe that this policy is correct, and if everyone could just follow the guidelines, all Americans would be healthy. And they are deeply ingrained in this. They're committed to their program. I also think that there's just like on a global scale, at universities, in the media, amongst all public health organizations, there is this deep level of cognitive dissonance to try to imagine that what they have been recommending to people all these years is not only not helping people, but maybe harming people. And so the idea that you could reverse yourself, it's almost like, asking the Politburo to give up communism, because I mean, everybody would have to do it all at once and just join hands and say we were wrong. But it's so deeply ingrained in so many institutions, so many careers, and I think it's very hard to reverse course, even with the data. The data is so strongly showing that it clearly just has not worked. I hope that somewhat answers your question. I mean, I think that there's one other aspect of that Belinda Fetke has been brilliantly researching, which is that the influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which seems to be far more ingrained in public health institutions in the U.S. than I had ever imagined. And of course, they believe that the vegetarian diet is the chosen one. And so this Juan Sabate, who's on the current committee, he's actually, I noticed just in researching for this talk that he for at least one previous committee was already working as an outside expert, has been very much involved in the guideline process. So there is a disturbing degree of influence by that group in U.S. nutrition policy. Okay, going down now.
We've got time for one more question, Nina.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to take this one on racial disparities. It's an opportune time to address racial disparities. Working as a nurse in low-income and homeless population shows the guidelines maintain the self-centered interest versus the common good. doctors are not informed either. What is being done to educate the AMA? Well, the American Medical Association, I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that people who are low income really, they're really truly the worst off. I mean, they get fed these meals that are very high carb, low protein, no healthy natural fats. They rely on these meals. They don't have choices. They don't have the ability to educate themselves outside. Many of them don't know how to cook, so they just don't have a tradition of relying on whole foods. If they happen to have an educator for the SNAP program, which is the food stamp program, that educator will teach them to eat according to dietary guidelines. So, I mean, that's if they're lucky. So I think it's that is the population, essentially a captive population that is relying on this food. And that's the one that I really feel is most worried about, because it is almost a social justice issue. I mean, those people, they need to be healthy just as much as we all need to be healthy. And so I feel very strongly that there should be the opportunity for that.
All right, I am going to come in and I'm going to bring Vinny back as well.
Okay.
So hang on a second while I bring Vinny back in.
All right.
Come on, Vinny.
Vinny's off. He's already gone off to.
It just takes a second when I invite somebody on screen. It takes a second for it to work. So I can hear him. We'll see him shortly.
I'm here.
Yeah, you're. Let me make sure your video is on. Oh, your video is off. There we go.
Oh, so for once it wasn't my fault. Wow.
Well, you could have done it, but it doesn't matter. You're here. So listen, we want to thank Nina. This was a fantastic presentation, really, really informative. We're sorry that the whole schedule got screwed up, but we got you in, so that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Vinny and I are going to close it out. So thanks, Nina.
Great. Okay. Well, goodbye, everybody. Happy quarantining, and I hope everybody stays safe and well and in good health.
Nina, I'll see you on the Friday show, I'm sure, in a week or two. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry,
thanks for doing.
So I didn't mean to cut her off mid-sentence. Sorry about that itchy trigger finger. So look, we just want to thank everybody. It's been an amazing 2 days. I'm probably more surprised than anybody that we got through it technically as well as we did. Vinny?
I told Andy not to do a live. I said, look, this is going to be horrible at best. There's no way we're going to pull this off. This is going to be worse than the producers, if you're old enough to remember that whole thing.
Springtime.
I thought we were going to be singing Springtime for Hitler in Germany at some point.
Yeah.
And somehow we pulled it off. I'm not going to say we pulled it off. Andy, you pulled it off.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm very gratified, and I know you are too, at how many people showed up.
Yeah.
How much people participated and seemed to really get into it. So that's great. This is, we've talked about this a lot. We don't want to turn this into a giant infomercial, but nsngfoods.com, our promo code SUMMIT, SUMMIT, for 20% off. And if you subscribe, our normal prices are 15% off for subscribing. You can do weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly subscriptions. So if you add the 20% Summit promo to the 15% discount you get with the subscription, it's bringing the price for a 10-pack of UltraFat down to $16.99, which is a great price. We appreciate all of that.
$1.60 per pack. And look, I was going to say that a few times over the past 2 days, but I was like, I don't want to get too salesy. It's not what we do. This thing was brought to you by, NSNG Foods. But I did the math yesterday, and I went, wait a minute. If you do a subscription, it's 15%. I even asked Andy, I said, 15% off, and then they can get 20% off by putting Summit in?
Yeah.
How much money are we losing on that? But it's a special, and we're excited about you guys coming in, and I want people, and Andy wants people, we want people to try the product.
That's just it, because we know it's a great product. We put a lot of effort and money into developing it, and we think people are going to love it and really benefit from it. So we want to get as many people to try it as we can.
So there you have it. Andy, should we let everyone go and have their weekend now?
Yes. Thank you again to everybody. Thank you to all of our speakers. We had an incredible array of really talented people, and we couldn't have pulled this off without all them. Couldn't have pulled it off without Vinny. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the next one. Don't know when it's going to be, but we will do another.
We're doing this again.
Yeah.
All right. Bye for now.
Joanne, yes, we will be able to watch replay videos. Everybody, they will be up as soon as we can possibly get them up, both on nsngfoods.com and on YouTube. We will have an NSNG Foods channel, and we will promote that. Anybody who was here will get an email saying that the videos are up and telling you where to find them.
We may put them on my Vinny Todorich YouTube also, just to have them everywhere so that people, and by the way, they will always remain free. We're not selling this.
No.
Think it's not anything. I don't sell information that's going to help people. Just like the podcast, it's all free. Go get it. And as I always sign off, folks, put life into living and do it with enthusiasm.
Thanks, everybody.